All right, hello everyone. This is the Boozy. That's Vlad, and today's Blizer episode, we're gonna be we have the pleasure of having Eric, also known as Snowfro, the creator of ArtBlocks. So
Hi
I'm really
there.
excited about this. We're gonna ask him some nice questions. Eric, how are you, man?
I'm doing really well. How about yourself?
Not bad, not
Thanks
bad
for
at
that.
Good,
all.
good. I think most people will probably know you from the episode title, but I would be inclined to ask you about your background, and how you got into the crypto slash NFT space, just so, people who might not be as familiar would be up to speed with who you are.
I got into crypto in 2017, actually, like the day before on New Year's Eve, 2016. I was struggling to buy my first Bitcoin. I quickly learned what Ethereum was, fell in love with the concept. It just blew my mind, like the theory of smart money. Um, didn't really understand what an NFT was fully until June of 2017 when I read a post on Reddit for claiming CryptoPunks. And at that point, I had some smart contract experience. I had been doing some fun stuff with contracts and learning about the overall space. And so I jumped on the claiming process and learned a ton. And yeah, I mean, I've been a coder on a hobby, purely hobby, like almost copy paste level for my whole life, pretty much, but never formally a coder until about March of last year. And even though I did build ArtBlocks and everything that you see now still from scratch, it's spaghetti. And when professionals take over, you'll see that I was definitely not like a professional coder when I built this. But yeah, that's a little bit about my background.
Awesome. And I guess you kind of touched on the first NFTs being CryptoPunks that you saw. Did you make a purchase at that time? Were you kind of skeptical? And I
No,
guess what was your first NFT
yeah,
purchase? Or
I claimed them. So and they were. I mean, I think there's now debate as to whether they were the first NFT on Ethereum or not, but they were the first
right.
kind of significant one, right? So I claimed 34 CryptoPunk zombies on the day of the claiming. On the I guess maybe the third day of the claiming, they were still there. And so they were for sure my first NFT. I guess my first formal under the ERC 721 standard. My first NFT was the CryptoKitty because they created that standard, right?
Hmm.
So
Right.
um, that was probably my first official NFT, and then man, since then it's been quite the
And what
quite the.
exactly led you to going towards like zombies, just getting 34 zombies? Was there anything in particular particular?
Well, yeah, I mean the in the Reddit post, and then obviously on like the Larva Labs website, they specifically highlighted the rarity of a zombie. They specifically made it clear that there was only going to be 88 zombies, and so there was going to be 24 apes, and by the time I got my wallet synced, there were no more apes left. And so I just picked up all the zombies that I can pick up.
It's kind of like art blocks now, eh?
It is just a little bit more of a surprise now instead of knowing what you're going to get.
So what was the path, going from that event and that led you to Art Blocks? Because I know like you've obviously generated your own art, but kind of what put you the thought of building something that's going to be a lot bigger, that's going to be providing uh something like for the space that's, obviously like phenomenal growth compared to so many other places. So what was the path?
It was actually a kind of a path of greed. As I was claiming my CryptoPunks, I realized that the blockchain had mechanisms that would allow me to claim one without knowing what I was going to get, and I would be presented with one. So as I'm claiming these zombies, I'm sitting there thinking, man, like, why do I get to claim all these zombies? And that literally at that moment is when it dawned on me that it would be nice for a, a smart contract based platform to allow you to generate art or claim art or content in general without knowing what you're going to get. And so if a zombie is 88 out of 10,000, then you have 88 out of 10,000 chances of getting one when you click generate instead of manually picking one out.
Yeah, and so I guess like that's how you kind of founded Art Blocks, or did you have maybe ideas? I'm curious about like the process as well. Like, did you like involve other people? Did you kind of bounce ideas on how you were going to build a platform, or that was pretty much like the first step and you kind of move forward with that?
Lots of ideas were bounced around. I had a very amazing support group of friends that even though I think they thought I was a little bit crazy, they were willing to listen and give me ideas and kind of formalize a plan. So originally ArtBlocks wasn't even going to be on Ethereum. It was going to be a blockchain based project, but completely different than what you see now. Soon after that, I kind of came to my senses and I was like, well, this should just be on Ethereum. During that process, I actually developed what's called ArtBlocks version 1 in collaboration with a really awesome duo of developers. Their name is Block Rocket Tech. They were behind the development of Known Origin, for example. And so they were just like really brilliant dudes. And I met them at a conference in Manchester and decided that maybe we could try to work together. So they actually helped me create and implement the very first version of ArtBlocks. And that first version of ArtBlocks is very different what it is today, but it's still the same concept that a piece of generative art or content would listen to variables that come from the blockchain and produce unique outputs or iterations from there.
What was the first version, just so we get a timeline? Probably can find this information, but
May 2018 is when I found a Medium article where I kind of published ArtBlocks version 1 to the world, kind of explaining what it is. It was much more complex. It kind of had, there was 2 tokens involved, or there was 2 contracts involved. There was like this thing called the interface token, and it was actually kind of a mess. We reworked that a little bit into ArtBlocks version 2 that happened later in the year. So later in 2018, I remember I was at the hospital with my wife having our second child when I got the email or the message saying, hey, we're ready to go. Like it's ready to launch. So obviously it took me a little while to do it after that. Then ArtBlocks version 3 was when we started exploring the concept of minting an ERC 721 token with an ArtBlocks piece. And that was early 2019. And I kind of got into this rut where I had this vision for this platform, but I had a really hard time communicating it to the developers, like the long-term vision of it. And that's on me, right? Like I'm just not a good communicator. I think, I had a tendency to ramble on Slack and just be like, oh, we can do this, we can do that. But what happens is when you're not good at communicating the vision, it becomes very expensive to get people to build for you, because they'll build something and then you essentially pay for their time, and then you're presented it and it's like, oh, well, this isn't at all what it's intended to be. So I kind of, in a weird way, kind of gave up on ArtBlocks, like in the sense of not being able to create. The ArtBlocks version 1, 2, and 3 was just a smart contract. There was no front end. Hosting an app, hosting like a script was just really complex. So even artists that were into blockchain had a hard time creating something for the platform. As time went by, it became more and more apparent that like the entire infrastructure behind ArtBlocks was going to be just as important, if not more important, than just what the contract was storing in terms of immutability. And it wasn't until March of last year, because of COVID, that I ended up having a bunch of extra time on my hands. It's a huge difference when you don't have to drive to work and deal with traffic. And
Sure.
So I dove into Codecademy and I started to learn how to write JavaScript more thoroughly than I had just kind of tinkered with it before. And I learned Node and React. And a few months later, I had a proof of concept for ArtBlocks as a platform, right? Like you could mint a piece, it would render a unique iteration, and then a few months later, I launched, and it's been a crazy hurricane since.
Oh, so you actually built a backend like on your own? You've learned all the
everything.
That's really
Even
cool.
the smart contract was changed significantly from, almost like entirely from what the original smart contract was built. It's nice because they established such a great base with their contract, and like the ArtBlocks V1, V2, V3. And that's how I learned most of what I know about Solidity, was working back and forth with Block Rocket Tech and understanding the contract and what they were doing. As a total noob developer, I learned to build everything in about 3 months, and then spend another few months building it and putting it together and finalizing it.
That's very impressive. I can commend you on the fact that very few, I feel, people in that situation where they've probably lost a certain number of dollars on development go out and learn it on their own to kind of wrap up the project, right? Like a lot of projects die for that specific reason, right? Because people don't take, I don't want to say like responsibility, but like full full charge of what they're developing, right? They just try and outsource it, so it becomes very difficult.
So dedication, right?
It's dedication. It's difficult to communicate, obviously, the vision. I've been around since 2017 and participated in many of the flopped project, right? And it was just so mind-blowing to me that, I mean, I understand why this happens, but like how much money is raised for a project with an idea, right? Without like a fully functional or even minimal viable product.
Right.
And so I guess I was a little spiteful for the amount of projects that, essentially convinced me to spend money with them. And then not even like a reasonable MVP would come out from that project. And I actually feel like I became even more spiteful given the fact that as a total noob programmer, I was able to create ArtBlocks without funding, without, external resources. And so then when we launched, it just felt like I had a working product, and I also am very lucky that it worked that way. I mean, there's so many different things that happened that I do associate with timing, unintentional timing, luck, etc. So, there's a lot going on there.
And do you ever plan on having any more fundraisers in the future? Because I was talking to G Money and he was saying you guys had one.
Yeah, we did a small funding round with literally, I didn't want to raise money. This is my hobby and this is my baby. And I didn't feel the need to. It was generating income. But all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you're going to need to hire some people full time just from the inbound alone, right? And the platform was making enough money to hire someone full time. But, for me, this was all happening really fast. And it's funny, like everybody that works at ArtBlocks makes more money than I've ever made in my normal job, right? But like this is the startup community. These are professionals. These are, it's like there was no room to haggle, negotiate. It was literally like, I think you are an incredibly awesome person and I want to work with you. And so I think that if it was something that I was bootstrapping myself and it was just my little hobby, or like some people call it a lifestyle business, it's a lot more difficult to just hire those key people based on this fear that you wouldn't be able to afford to pay them forever. That's the real fear. It's not being cheap. It's that I don't want someone to make like a life transition, right, and then, we can't sustain it. So by bringing on that funding, we have enough money in the bank to pay the payroll of these, team members for 2 years, even if ArtBlocks doesn't sell a single more piece. And that gave me the confidence that I needed to say, all right, let's do this. Like, let's figure out payroll and let's hire some people. And right now there's 4 of us and we're, kind of on a trial run with a 5th. And, at that point we'll kind of probably hold off for a little bit, but yeah, it's really exciting overall. The difference between raising money. We might raise money again. It just feels weird to me to do that because now we have the money to pay everybody for a couple of years. The platform is, producing a decent amount of revenue. And I just want to make sure I'm not caught up in like a hype cycle too much. I want to prove that this platform is viable in and outside of the crypto space. And so based on like our, I think more modest valuation from our first round, I think that I'm in a good spot psychologically to where I feel like this is good. Like this feels right. This valuation is probably inflated because it's crypto and it's kind of crazy, but it doesn't feel like completely out of control inflated. And I'm fine to be at this level for a little while while we navigate, and
no, it's really great to see the platform grow. I mean, like some of the art pieces there are extremely, I feel, innovative and really kind of unique in their own way, right? Like it's really cool to see generative art. But coming back to maybe the initial art piece, the Chromie Squiggle, right? Released
favorite,
by you.
Definitely my favorite there.
Like I'm curious how that like came to be, and I guess maybe like coming from your background, like what were some of the challenges in like designing that, adding it to the platform, and kind of maybe also the like maybe your expectations, excitements once it started kind of taking shape and being sold to the community. Like what were your thoughts at that point in time?
Yeah, it was a proof of concept, right? It was meant to show that you could have nearly infinite variation with a colorful creative output. And it worked for that reason. There's 10,000 of them. There could have been 100,000. There could have been 1,000,000, and they all would have been unique. I actually toyed with the idea of deploying them for free with an addition of 1,000,000, because 1,000,000 was like the technical limitation of the platform, right? That was just like the actual technical limitation of the platform. And so that they would be around forever. Although forever is relative, because I thought 10,000 was going to be around for a couple of years and they were gone in 5 weeks, right? So maybe 1,000,000 would have been gone in 3 years. I don't know. But there's something beautiful to me about the fact that you could have 1,000,000 unique iterations and people could just kind of mint. Obviously there's gas, so nothing is free on Ethereum, but people could just mint them at their leisure. And a very intelligent man convinced me that I should not do that. And I think it's a very smart move on his part. And that I should make the Chromie Squiggle a limited piece, just like the CryptoPunks, for example, which is, to me, the Larva Labs team is, the whole reason we're here. And, I feel like they nailed it the first time with the CryptoPunks at 10,000. And it just kind of, I understood the vision of capping the Squiggle at 10,000 after it was brought to my attention that like the opportunities that could come from a capped edition. So yeah, no, it's, do
you mind sharing that reason? Is that like a privately held?
No. The reason is this: it's that it would enable so there's a lot of projects that are open edition, and there's just not a feeling of its completeness. Like there are some squiggles that are less common than others, right? But like if they're free and infinitely available, then those are also infinitely available. And also, it added value to the squiggle as more of an art piece or a study than just a proof of concept, right? So the squiggle is the logo of our platform, and it's meant to just kind of remind people of generative art and generative content, but it's not. If it was just unlimited, it wouldn't have the same appeal, I think, than today. So a proof of concept of that is the Squiggle DAO, for example, that if a squiggle was unlimitedly attainable, then the Squiggle DAO as it exists today could not exist today, right? There would be no sense of limit. And to me, I didn't have anything to do with the Squiggle DAO in terms of its formation. I'm incredibly flattered that my piece was selected for it. I feel so validated in like so many different ways, from everything from the squiggle itself as an individual artwork to the platform and the variability between the pieces and stuff. And I'm really glad to get to enjoy that today as a member of the Squiggle DAO, just like everybody else. And that would not have been the case if it would have been unlimited edition or 1,000,000 edition of 1,000,000.
Yeah, definitely.
And for people who aren't familiar with the Squiggle DAO, what exactly is it, Erick?
So Squiggle DAO is a organization that is putting together what's called like the treasury, and they're putting together a nice collection they're focused on generative art, which generative art until recently didn't really have a lot of love specifically as generative art, but people have been purchasing and acquiring generative art pieces for years. The Squiggle DAO is kind of there to promote, collect, potentially profit on generative art. And your way to participate in the DAO is by owning a squiggle would allow you entry into their Discord. Owning a squiggle doesn't let you participate in the DAO itself. But then B, if you either purchase the squig token, an ERC20 token, or if you contribute a squiggle to the vault, to the kind of squiggle fund, they would give you the squig token. And so then when you own the squig token, you are a voting member of the DAO. And that's what a DAO is, right? It's a decentralized group, a decentralized organization. So what's happening now is you have a bunch of people that have donated squiggles to the DAO. So now they have a bunch of squig token. And so the decisions that the DAO makes moving forward, from everything from which artworks to acquire, which NFTs to acquire, to how to handle funds, how to handle profits, how to handle everything, those votes will now be in the hands of the community that owns the squig token. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's the Flamingo DAO, which I'm very lucky to get to be a part of, has proven that a DAO is a functional mechanism. I was very skeptical before that. They're a really wonderful group of people, and the Flamingo DAO is an expensive investment to be a part of, and the Squiggle DAO I don't think they're going to mirror exactly what Flamingo is trying to do, but if the Squiggle DAO provides a tenth of the community sense that happens inside of Flamingo DAO behind NFTs, specifically behind generative NFTs, which is this kind of newer growing segment of the market, then I think it'll be a much more egalitarian DAO. It'll be a really neat way for people to join a group of people that are making decisions as a group. And I think it's really exciting.
Erick, what would you consider if you had to compare an alien CryptoPunk to a Chromie Squiggle of equal rarity? Well, what would you say?
Oh man. Well, a hyperpipe would for sure be the closest to it. I mean, technically, there are 4 hyperpipes. We still have 800 squiggles to mint. There could be another one, but like I can't imagine that there would be more than 5. And there's 9 aliens, right? So technically, a hyperpipe is more rare than an alien, but I mean, not even close to trying to compare the projects. I just mean in terms of like overall odds, or not odds, like an overall like percentage of one compared to the other. But yeah, I mean, one was listed yesterday for $2.7 million.
Oh man.
I don't expect it to sell anytime soon, but I mean, I remember when the alien was posted for 1,200 ETH back in 2018, and back then it would have only been worth, like $300,000, and we were all like, man, this guy's smoking crack. Like, what is he like? I want an alien, but I'm not spending 1,200 ETH for it, right? And now you're looking at $4,200 ETH like transactions. So This guy that posted it is someone that I consider a mentor and a friend, and I'm really happy for him. And also because I wanted a full set of squiggles, which at this point has kind of have waved bye-bye to I offered an alien in exchange for that squiggle and was essentially kind of told no. So he believes in the value of the squiggles so much, and it gives me a lot of confidence and a lot of comfort in kind of what I've created. It's beautiful. The structure of the squiggle has kind of some rarity tiers, which are important, but it also is more spread out. So CryptoPunks and squiggles, in terms of like how the community can get around certain pieces, it's just, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences, and it's been really fun to watch. I think that all of these things can be a social experiment for the future, to kind of see what people get excited about and not excited about. So yeah.
And when it comes to licensing, I know we talked a little bit yesterday about the difference between CryptoPunks and Chromie Squiggles. Can you expand on that a little bit? And I guess what would be the limitations or restrictions versus the openness of the Chromie Squiggle versus the punks?
Yes, the CryptoPunks have not established, the developers of the CryptoPunks, so Matt and John, have not established formally a license for the punks. There's talk of them doing it. There's always been kind of, but they've kept it, and I could be way wrong, but they've kept it unlicensed. And I'd be the first to admit how much I expressed disagreement with that over the last few years in the Discord. But man, they are correct in how they're handling their babies. And I now support. So it's crazy, like how they're, that's what crypto is all about. It's like just being, educated. And it's crazy how frustrated it was, how frustrating it was for me not to have clarity on that. Whereas now the lack of clarity, and eventually whatever they decide, is part of what adds value to the CryptoPunks and what makes them kind of more artistically viable in the long term. The Chromie Squiggle, on the other hand, has a license called the NFT license attached to it. And the NFT license was created by one of the original CryptoKitties team. And the idea behind that license is that it's quite the opposite. Like, for example, in the CryptoPunks, last I checked, they don't even have a Creative Commons license. Most art out there uses Creative Commons licenses, which allows you to display it in your home and non-commercial settings, or maybe even commercial settings. It depends on the license. And it gives you very clear parameters of what is okay and what is not okay. When something's not licensed, that doesn't mean that you can just assume. When something's not licensed, you literally have zero privileges, zero rights inferred to you as the owner of that. And so the complete opposite of that is like the Chromie Squiggle, where it's using the NFT license For me, as a platform creator, I wanted to see people use the Chromie squiggle as the logo for their project, or I want to see people make wallpaper and all sorts of weird stuff with the squiggle. Why? Because I do consider the squiggle as a work of art, and it's my baby, and I definitely don't want to devalue it in terms of a work of art, but it's very different to me than the OG NFT on Ethereum as the CryptoPunks, and kind of what that means to the legitimate art world in terms of like in comparison to like what a Chromie squiggle. If somebody wants to make tennis shoes with a squiggle logo, like that would just make me so happy. As an artist, I will be deploying stuff on ArtBlocks over time that does not have that license, and I think it's perfectly okay for some things to have that license and some things to not. There's a piece on ArtBlocks named Archetype that has a Creative Commons license, but then the same artist deployed a piece called Paper Armadas that has the NFT license. And so I think it's fun to explore all of these things. And so with if you own a squiggle, you have using the NFT license, you have the privilege or the right, I don't know which is the right word, to commercialize your piece up to $100,000 in revenue before having to speak to me about it. Now, after you've made $100,000 on your squiggle shoes, you have to speak to me about it, right? Like that's what the license says. So it means that if you just want to go print some shirts or make some hats, like heck yeah, do it. As long as it's not racist or racy or whatever, I still have that control, right? That says that, no, you cannot hurt my brand by associating with things that are,
of course. Yep.
And so, yeah, so that I'm curious to see what people do with it. I'm dying to see what people do with it. And, if nobody else does, I'm going to do it. Like I'll just have to start like a little wallpaper company with my squiggles and all my other NFT license pieces.
And what exactly are generative art, man? Because a lot of people who don't know anything about generative art, could you like expand on what exactly are generative arts?
Generative art, in a nutshell, is art or content generated or produced by an algorithm. So, if you look at the thing that the artist makes, it's a bunch of code. If you look at a painting that an artist makes, you're looking at the finished product. So an artist is writing code, but when you run that code under whatever environment that may be, whether it's under an ArtBlocks JavaScript style environment, or whether it's using processing locally, or whether it's using, Python, compiled Python, that code creates an output. And it could be a single output code. It may not be considered deterministic or generative if it has only one output, but it could absolutely be considered algorithmic in the sense that this algorithm created this output. So we use the word generative art kind of as an umbrella for all of this, but there's so many different ways to describe it, where what we're doing is we're pursuing the idea that there are variables inside that algorithm that produce different outputs. So the first variable could make the background color white or blue or red or green. And so for a piece in my brain to be considered generative, not just algorithmic, it would be that it would be receptive to an external or internal, but generally an external input controlling some of the features that you see when the algorithm runs and produces an output. That would be it in a nutshell. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. Erick, we want to be cognizant of your time as well. I think you said you had a cutoff, but do have more questions.
Yeah, no, I'm good for a little bit. I've got another like 30 minutes.
Perfect. So I wanted to ask about, I guess, tying back to, I guess, the kind of the limited minting of the art, and at the same time, the I guess the generative portion, and kind of revert an example that I personally really like, which is the 720 minutes. And I think it's really cool because, first of all, you have a story behind why it's 720, right? But at the same time, the art is much more, I'd say, like usable. Than it's not just a pure image, right? It's something that you enjoy, but something that you can also utilize. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in creating art pieces, of this nature that are going to be not only, like I said, something to look at, but something that you can utilize, right? And from that specific example, you can probably put it on your digital time watch, which people have done, but you can also create physical works of arts, like we've discussed a little bit yesterday. So I was curious if you can like expand on that specific case, or maybe talk about some of other ideas that you have seeing maybe in the future, or like different use cases of art that would be beyond just like something nice to look at.
The concept of immutable art on chain basically means that you should be able to prove that you own something using the blockchain. And that proof can be as straightforward as proving that you own an image, which is how traditionally we've seen art handled in the blockchain sense. It could be the middle of the road, which is what ArtBlocks is doing, which is an algorithm proves that you own an output, a static output or an animated output, right? Then 720 Minutes took it a step further and said, okay, I'm listening to the system time and I'm going to actually respond to the system time. So as the system time is passing, the algorithm is changing, and yes, you have a functional NFT. And to me, not only is Alexis just a brilliant and also a very kind human being, but he saw that opportunity there, and not only like jumped on it, but jumped on it in a beautiful way. You know, it's like somebody could have just made the first clock on ArtBlocks just because it was just a clock. You know, like he definitely made it this beautiful piece. When you want to take it a little bit further, there are physical implications to art, and you know, there's this talk of like, you know, physical versus digital or versus tokenized art, and to me, there's something weird that happens when there's an opportunity for the physical piece to become separate from the digital piece, from the blockchain-based piece. I don't think it's a bad thing. It just makes me uncomfortable. The thought that somebody would sell the token on OpenSea, but the sculpture gets left behind in somebody's house, and like, does the token lose value because that sculpture is no longer attached to that token? Or do they both have value? Or, you know, is that person going to then feel the need to buy that sculpture too? Like there's this, you know, it's starting to transcend the beauty of blockchain and add complications that were not existent before. So the next step after using a utility function in an ArtBlocks piece, like making a clock, to me is this concept of a potentially, I've called it, probably terrible terminology, but like a disposable physical piece. And that can be something where the blockchain shows an output and proves that you own that output, but that output can be made and remade and remade and remade as many times as possible. So whether it's a output that randomly assembles some Lego pieces and then tells you, hey, go buy these Lego pieces, and it gives you instructions on how to assemble it. So then if your kid comes and like knocks it off the table and it shatters, you just download the instructions and like build it again. Whether it's a coffee table that an industrial designer, instead of creating one table, creates an algorithm that generates tables. And so, you know, the output creates a set of plans, and you give that set of plans to a mill worker, and that mill worker can create that table for you. And so you own the table, but you also own the intellectual, well, you don't own the intellectual property, but you have the rights to the intellectual property that enabled you to create that table. So it makes that table a piece of art with provenance. Like that coffee table now has provenance. And, you know, there's everything from like mid-century furniture has provenance to a degree, especially if you can find that it's legitimate. It's not a counterfeit or like a knockoff, but this kind of establishes provenance to another level. It's giving you provenance into the designer's brain. Finally, I guess like a next step would be the fact that, you know, a traditional NFT is not interactive. And so because a traditional NFT is not interactive, there's only so many things you can do. And one of the major inspirations for ArtBlocks is something I used to be involved in I still am, like doing projection mapping technology, which basically I've simmered it down to color mapping because I never made a building look like it was crumbling or all the fun stuff that you see on like these, you know, cool projection mapping videos. But, you know, you have a projector, and that projector projects polygons onto a surface. Well, you know, if you've ever tried to align a projector or like make sure it's straight or not like a trapezoid, you realize that light does some really crazy things. So if I have a static NFT that is meant to be projected through a projector onto a three-dimensional surface, it's literally impossible. Maybe nothing's impossible, but like just the simple difference in focal length of a lens would make it almost impossible that you would just be able to get a projector and align vertices onto an object that was on a wall. So ArtBlocks pieces or any other kind of interactive NFT, which, a lot of that's happening in the blockchain space anyways, but you can have a piece that is shot through a projector. It is the piece that it is. You have proof on the blockchain that piece is what it is. But then, because it's interactive, you can then edit that piece. So if I need to move the location of those little triangles to align with a physical three-dimensional space, I can do that. And I still own that piece because the blockchain says I own that piece. I still own that arrangement of triangles because the blockchain says I own that arrangement of triangles. If my house burns down, I just have to go buy another projector and I have to go buy those 3D objects again, and then I project onto those again. To me, that permanence of ability to recreate the piece that you own is really important to me, to not feel like we're diverging too much from the beauty of provenance on the blockchain. And so when Beeple created his piece and everybody got those infinite objects frames, I think that was mind-blowing, and I think that was like revolutionary. And I think it literally spurred a new thought process and revolution in NFTs and technology. And I commend him for doing that, and I think that's wonderful. And there will always be a place for that. But there eventually does become this line that is drawn when that physical can disappear. If that physical is signed, it's the same thing like with Dimitri's piece, with Dimitri did a piece called Ringers on ArtBlocks, and then he had a signature piece, right? So we pay extra, we get his piece signed, which is so awesome to have. But like, if it burns down, like I just lost that piece. I'm not going to be able to call Dimitri and be like, hey man, will you sign another piece? I mean, he might because he's nice, but that's not, if it was a regular piece of art that he had to like paint for 30 hours and my house burned down, I'm not gonna be like, hey, paint me another piece. Like, it's your responsibility to kind of maintain your stuff.
Right.
But that's about as far as I go in terms of comfort level with physical pieces without starting, I have this thesis, or I don't know what the right word is, that blockchain technology is so good that we don't need to fit a square peg in a round hole. Like we can come up with really good use cases for blockchain. I really think, not because it's my platform, but like I really think that ArtBlocks genuinely uses blockchain to the best of its abilities without any stretch of the imagination, without any having to like talk someone into why it works. And that's a driving factor, at least for me as a developer or as an entrepreneur. And so when you start being able to decouple something of value from something of value on the blockchain, I start to feel a little, I'm not saying it's bad, but like I start hesitating a little bit in terms of like, are we starting to kind of explore a square peg round hole kind of scenario again?
Mm-hmm.
And Eric, let's pretend that I'm an artist and I'm trying to get into the curated section of ArtBlocks. How exactly do I get about doing this?
Currently, the application process is completely shut down. It's closed. We're overwhelmed with artists and amazing artists. So let's pretend that, fast forward a few weeks and like we're able to open up that application process again. First of all, if you are already a creative coder, you've got a huge advantage over a lot of the people that have applied. We have some brilliant minds that joined the application list on ArtBlocks with a concept. And maybe early on, I would have been able to stop what I was doing and kind of like work with them and maybe even help them code the concept into like a piece of art. We are now at a point where there's just not enough bandwidth for that, like not even nearly enough bandwidth. So as a result, if you have a piece of code, you're already at a major advantage. I'd say that about a third of our list of applicants applied conceptually, not with like a ready to go project. Okay. So once you have that, once the applications open back up, you would apply and you would very patiently wait until it's your turn to be called. And once it's your turn to be called, if you have a script that's ready to go, that's ready to operate under the ArtBlocks ecosystem, then you would be given a Rinkeby testnet project. So then you would operate, you would deploy your project on a Rinkeby, you would get to test it. You can't break anything, so it's fine. You get to test it, make sure it all works. And then during that time, once you give the green light that your project is where you want it and it's ready to go, then Jeff, who is in charge of like, the entire art application side, and I don't pity him because that is just quite the task, would eventually push your artwork to the curators and have them decide whether it fits into the curated section or whether it'll fit into the factory section even more. And that is based on various factors. I think the number one factor is the variability of the outputs over the range of the outputs. So, you know, if something has slight differences between each one, if you're scrolling through a page of ArtBlocks and you just start seeing a lot of the similar thing over and over and over, I think it's not bad. It's still amazing. It's just that is going to be more of a factory type project. Also, the value, like sometimes people want, you know, to get $2 million out of their project, and like we of the platform, like they're the ones that have made this happen. So we manage economics and say, okay, like you can deploy this, but this is the number of iterations that we feel suits the variability of your script, and this is the price that enables people to still be able to afford the work. We want to preserve that as much as possible. Obviously, if we get some blue chip artists, that price may not be able to be the same, but people will see the value in the more expensive piece because it's a blue chip artist, right? And then the other one is just technical expertise. Like, is the project technically, you know, it doesn't have to be complex. It's just, does it show expertise as a programmer, as a developer, and as a creative coder? And so many of the projects that are going to factory, I would have loved to see in curation. Luckily, there's 20 people on the curation board. And so they're making decisions based on, and those 20 people are professionals in all sorts of industries, art and NFT related, and they're making that decision. And of course, you know, I don't vote, but if I did vote, even some of the ones I wanted to get to curation wouldn't have gotten to curation. So it's just beautiful to see that there's like a group consensus there. But just because it's not curated, it doesn't mean it's any worse than any curated project. There's just a lot of factors that go into play. So if your project is selected for curation, you're given a drop date, where, you know, and then you deploy at a certain date and time. If your project is sent to a factory deployment, then you deploy on your own time whenever you want, as long as you don't conflict with like a curated project.
Awesome. And are you getting a lot of yeah, go on, Vlad?
I was gonna just like comment, I guess, like it's a very interesting combination of technology and art. You know what I mean? I think in many situations, obviously I don't want to pigeonhole all the engineers under that bubble, but you know, talking for myself at least, I wouldn't have perhaps like the eye for creating art, right? Like I can appreciate certain art pieces, but I think it's an entirely other level to be able to, obviously coding is one thing, but then like creating something that's very pleasing, that has like a good backstory that makes a lot of sense, right? And I think I really like the process, the way that you have it set up, where you have curators, but you also have people who validate the code at the upfront, right? So you have kind of the both things, and it's really interesting how it's done.
Yeah, not everybody can just deploy on the platform, right? Like on Rarible, you can save an image and tokenize it, and
right.
And here, there's just so much more of a barrier to entry, not on purpose. It's just you have to understand how creative coding works. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to deploy anything. And the cost of deployment on mainnet is anywhere from 1 to 3 ETH, right? So you have to be willing to put your money where your mouth is and say, you know, I'm at least going to sell $8,000 worth of this piece. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my money back that I spent on it. So that self-curation is really important. So far, we haven't had anybody that kind of self-chose not to deploy. But as you know, as the platform gets more saturated, and you know, it's for a while there, it's like anything that was put out, people would buy, and I think that's awesome. That's part of kind of like this whole NFT craze that we're part of. But eventually, we will hit a homeostasis, right, where potentially even a curated drop won't sell out within a week, and that's okay. I mean, you know, there's room for everything, and the fact that the platform is semi-creating its own economics over time to me is really important, and kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off of us from deciding what we do and what we don't do. Like right now, we're in the process of basically begging artists that are deploying on the factory not to do drops that are 1,000 editions. Like those days are over, right? Where like you could just, anything you drop would just sell out. Most of the projects that deployed on the factory about a month ago are still on the factory. And that's, I like that. I like that you can browse and check out all the cool work on the platform. But some people looked at that as a negative, like, oh man, you know, it's oversaturated, or ArtBlocks is slowing down, or whatever. It's like, no. We want to give people if you're a coder, if you have a creative concept that you want to put on the blockchain and utilize our system of provenance to validate what you're creating, you should have the ability to put it on there without being throttled because we're concerned about oversaturating the market. So we are throttling because A, we don't have the capacity to handle more people to a degree. And you know, we are listening to the community and trying to, you know, like I said, like ask artists to do smaller editions, maybe not necessarily lower their price. Like that's on them. We don't want to tell someone what their piece is worth or what it's not worth. So yeah, there's a lot of moving parts there for sure though.
Awesome. And are you getting any interest by art houses or museums or whatever?
Yes. To me, I think that's one of the most exciting things is that we've created something that has been validated by the crypto art space, which is great because that's my community, you know, it's all my friends. But, you know, starting with the ZKM is an institute in Germany, an amazing institute for like digital art that's been around for years. And they reached out early on and said, hey, I think what you're doing is kind of interesting and potentially impactful in the art world. So they actually just did an exhibition for ArtBlocks pieces, generative art pieces, and started displaying ArtBlocks pieces on this massive screen that they have outside of their building in Germany. So that's, I mean, I saw a squiggle and I just lost, you know, that was amazing. And yeah, we're talking to a lot of institutional level art people that, you know, there's a lot of people that are famous that are jumping into the NFT space, and there's only enough money in the NFT space, right? So like all the Paris Hiltons, if all the Paris Hiltons of the world dropped an NFT tomorrow, they would not all sell for $1 million. And eventually that will find homeostasis as well. And so people will find value in what people are bringing to the table instead of just like a name. So, you know, in the traditional art world, generative art has not been so well recognized or appreciated. So right now for a blue chip artist to approach ArtBlocks that does paintings, it just doesn't make sense. That would feel very square peg round hole. If it's a digital artist, an illustrator that can compile, like for example, one of my favorite projects on ArtBlocks and one of my favorite artists in the crypto space in general is Stina Jones, and she created this piece called Algobots, and she's not a technical programmer, but she's an illustrator, and so she was able to create layers, just like kind of CryptoPunks, right? Like CryptoPunks, you have a head, and then you have the features, and you know they're placed in the right place because of the algorithm. So Algobots, similar concept. She created like Avastars, right? So she created all these layers of SVGs, and then when you minted it on ArtBlocks, it would randomly pick all the different pieces and put them together into like a finished product. I do think there's room for that, not feeling awkward, like with the, not just blue chip artists, but like the traditional art world getting involved with ArtBlocks. But what's going to be beautiful is that there is a subset of traditional artists that are very, very capable in programming and in code. And when a lot of them realize what can happen on ArtBlocks, and when ArtBlocks takes them on, and it doesn't feel like what I feel like a lot of the traditional artists entering the space are it just feels very money grabby in some cases, not in all cases, but in some cases. I think that's going to be a really beautiful thing. It's really going to cement the value proposition that ArtBlocks brings to art from a provenance of ownership, and more importantly, a provenance of generation.
I was actually listening to Art Gnome, and he's a big fan of Manoloid. Has he ever contacted you or contacted him?
I had a conversation with him in 2018 about ArtBlocks version 1, and I read it the other day, and I was so embarrassed at like, just because back then it was like, I get really excited about everything, right? So like, you know, I just, but now I have something to show. It's like, hey, I actually don't have to like go through and explain, oh, and you deploy this contract and we're going to put your code on it. Blah, blah, blah. Now it's just like, hey, check this out. Go to this project page and see the variation. And here's this link that shows you all of the code that's generating that script, yada, yada. And so it's a totally different experience. And I read back to the email, and it was a conversation with him. And so he replied, he was very kind and replied, and he's like, I don't know that I'm ready for this. And, you know, he does post-process a lot of his pieces, right? So like the code generates it, but then he actually like brings it in and touches it up and does a lot of stuff. But he wasn't opposed to it. but man, like my explanation of it was just like word vomit. Like, oh, check this out. And so I think that I wore down some artists in 2018 with the concept and my excitement. And so there's like 5 artists specifically that I plan on holding off a little bit and then reaching back out and saying, hey, like we talked, you were kind enough to respond, because dozens of artists in 2018 simply just didn't reply to my email.
Not anymore.
yeah, it's a different story now. And just, try to get back in touch with them. Manaloid is one of, I mean, he's just a genius, right? And so, having him on the platform would just be so amazing. But we're not pushing people, and we're not in a hurry. I mean, again, we're overwhelmed with art at this point with algorithms. I do think that everything that is meant to happen is going to happen. And, the day that we get to drop a Manaloid piece will be, a real special, at least for me, it'll be a really special day.
For sure.
So
like what exactly is the best way to think about value of art blocks, of the curated drops? Like, given they're all one of ones, but the aesthetics could vary wildly. Like, what do you think brings value? Like, is there anything you look for specifically?
I think with ArtBlocks, you need to buy it because you like it.
Okay.
Obviously, people find all sorts of ways of adding value to it. Some things are less common than others, and so there's a lot of opportunities there. But to me, what adds value to ArtBlocks is if you like the piece, obviously, and if you believe that we are all about the art, but even in the real traditional art world, the art is a lot of speculation as well, right? So we don't want speculation to be a driving factor for us, but we also would be completely ignorant to say you are a bad person for speculating on art, because in the real art world, that's half of what's happening anyways. So, if you believe that you like the piece, and if one day that piece became zero value, would you still put it up on your wall? And if the answer is yes, then that's the answer, right? That's how you collect. Also, from a slightly more OCD perspective, ArtBlocks has focused on a concept of collectability, right? So right now we have series 1, series 2, we're in the middle of series 3 right now of the curated drops. And the reason we do that is to be able to enable people to have a rational amount of things to collect, right? So like series 2 would have been all the drops that happened from January 1st to March 31st. And it's a lot, and it's a pricey little package of a collection, but it's interesting to kind of be able to collect that, to have a curated set of everything that ArtBlocks came out in a curated series. Over time, I think that having a full curated ArtBlocks set, I think 10 people right now, 10 different accounts have that. To me, it demonstrates obviously the passion for generative art, it demonstrates a passion for the platform, but B, I think owning that is going to be special. Just like owning a full attribute set of CryptoPunks, to me at this point, is priceless. Having a full set of autoglyphs is priceless. And, right now the cheapest autoglyph is $200,000. Like, it's completely crazy to think about, putting together that set. But right now, a full ArtBlock set of series 1 is probably $10,000, right? Or $15,000. I don't know. And that's still an insane amount of money, but it's still attainable. And I think that's something that's going to have value regardless of whether it's crypto or not over time. I think that there will be value in that collectability.
Definitely. And do you have any upcoming innovation that you plan on adding to the experience of ArtBlocks?
Well, starting with our new website, which will be deployed sometime in May, I think that everybody will find it to feel a lot more professional and refreshing than what I created as a complete noob. There are so many different paths that we want to explore with smart contracts in terms of sources for entropy. For example, things that we have not included, mainly to keep things simple, but like timestamps, so that you can gauge how old a piece is, and maybe that'll affect what it looks like because it's a reflection of like its age built into the code.
Okay.
There's, we still want it to be deterministic. So you still want it to, you want to know what it is. And I think it's kind of curious that you might be able to like rewind and see what it looked like originally. But there's a lot of fun stuff that we want to innovate with that direction. So we're not ready to explore that yet. We have too much of a backlog of artists that are happy with the infrastructure that we have, and we just need to kind of make sure that we really perfect that. But yeah, there's a lot of like fun directions that we can go there. And then on top of that, you know, as a platform, we're so busy and our bandwidth is so tight, but like I would love to, as a platform, fund development of composable projects where people are using the NFTs that they own in other applications, whether it's something as simple as flying a paper armada around the Galaxis project, which is like a planet, or maybe people creating games around certain things. I really want to kind of potentially, as ArtBlocks, to kickstart it, fund development of those things where, you know, the root asset is minted and stored on ArtBlocks, but then things happen with it. And as soon as the bandwidth comes around, that's definitely something that we're going to spend some time in funds on.
So,
what about the use
and
of
if you had to choose three art, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask about
go ahead.
the use case of a different blockchain, right? Like we talked a little bit about that, but going away from Ethereum to a different blockchain. What are your thoughts on that?
I would love to let people mint an ArtBlocks piece for 5 cents or 50 cents. And I feel that there's a whole other market there for that type of opportunity. And the stuff happening on Tezos is a really good example of that. We definitely—
Is cost the only driver?
Sorry, I don't think cost is the only driver, but I do think that when you spend more on gas than the actual piece, I think there's a psychological component to that.
For sure.
But it's also speed, and it's also just how prolific you can make things. Also, maybe custody, right? So like Top Shot, you know, our next endeavor will be jumping into Flow blockchain, and Top Shot, you don't control your keys, and that's like blasphemous amongst the crypto world. But that's also why they have so many users, right? So we need to find we need to strike a balance there to where we can onboard more people to enjoy what we're doing, but you know, also maintain security and all that good stuff.
And is there a reason why you chose Flow instead of, let's say, Tezos or Cardano or
yeah,
Cosmos?
I think Flow. I think what Roham and his team are doing just feels right from the start. I think they started with the right mindset. They started with partnerships and then created or established the blockchain versus the other way around. Like all these other blockchains, it's like, oh yeah, and we're going to do this and this and this, and then nothing ever happens. So I think they have the right attitude. They have the right team. They have the right vision. And I am very much a supporter of what they do. So that's probably why.
Perfect. And just to be clear, like ArtBlocks always remain on Ethereum, right? You'd still be releasing projects on Ethereum?
Yeah. ArtBlocks will never migrate away from Ethereum ever.
Okay.
This would be a high throughput, low value implementation where, you know, you can generate a algorithmic tree for your CryptoVoxels parcel for $1.
Amazing.
Instead of just like copying the same tree over and over and over, you actually can have like a garden, and maybe that tree grows over time, whatever, you know, the implications are of that platform. So,
wow.
Erick, thank you. Really.
Hold on.
I was just gonna say, really appreciate all your answers.
Last question, man. I'm sorry.
Last question.
If you had to choose 3 projects on ArtBlocks of your most favorite projects, which one would you choose?
That's not fair.
That's putting him on the spot. That's
I had to, man. Someone asked me on Twitter.
I don't know that I can answer that because it's like telling you which my favorite children is my favorite. I definitely feel like I am speaking to celebrities when I talk to the artists that I'm working with on the platform. And it's literally like I'm more excited to get to talk to people like Dimitri than I would be if I was going to get a signature from like a famous actor in a movie, right? So like to me, these are my celebrities in the world. And so there's no way to kind of pick, but you know, I guess you could always look.
Let me rephrase maybe that question. Like, I guess, because we talked about how projects get into the sections into ArtBlocks, but I'm curious, like, what are your personal things that you look for in an art piece that you buy? Is it, you know, again, like complexity? Is it variation? Is it rarity? Like, what do you like to see like in an art piece beyond like some other things?
Yeah, I like the variation. I like the complexity, and that's the most important thing for me, I think, is that you really take advantage of what the algorithm benefits from having those individual pieces. So, you know, that to me is the most important thing. That's probably what I'm the most excited about. And I'm not saying that you can't have a good ArtBlocks project without that, but I love flipping through pages and just like seeing the complexity, and then also watching the community on Discord like go nuts over exploring the project and seeing all the variation, stuff like that.
Erick, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
It was awesome.
No, thank you guys for having me. Y'all are amazing. You have really good questions, so I really appreciate it. And good luck with your podcast. This is great.
All right.
Thank you so much
again.
Erick. Bye.
Take care, Erick. Bye.
Y'all take care.